Hey guys, Justin here. Using a quilt for backpacking and camping is all the rage these days, but what even is a quilt specific for camping and backpacking? And why would you want one, and how do you use it? Today we're gonna answer all of those questions for you. So what is a quilt? Like your grandma's quilt, quilts are made to keep you warm and act as blankets. They serve the same function as sleeping bags in your backpacking and camping setup as they're part of your sleep system, but they differ in the fact that they don't have a lot of those heavier and frankly ineffective parts of a sleeping bag. The bottom third of a quilt is the same as a sleeping bag. It fully encloses your feet and is fully enclosed to about the knees, but it's the top 2/3 where a quilt really becomes a quilt. It doesn't have any zippers, doesn't have a hood, and is open on the bottom. So whereas a sleeping bag encompasses you all the way around, a quilt is open and more like a blanket and then connects to the sides of your sleeping pad. So that might make you ask, all right, I have a sleeping bag, I really like my sleeping bag, and a quilt just seems like a sleeping bag with less features. But I think there's 5 main reasons why a quilt may be a better option for you compared to a sleeping bag. I have done a video that goes into a bit more detail into all 5 of these benefits, and I'll link that right up there. But the first one is comfort, and this is the main one for me. I find a quilt a lot more comfortable than a sleeping bag because it's more like a blanket. I can toss and turn all night long in a quilt and not get tangled up into it or uncomfortable like I do with a sleeping bag. The second benefit is weight. A quilt just has less features compared to a sleeping bag, doesn't have that hood and doesn't fully encompass you, so it uses less material. You might be saying, well, because it doesn't wrap all the way around me, won't I get cold? And that's a question that a lot of people have, and the reason why you don't get cold is because hopefully you're using a sleeping pad that has an R value that's rated for the temperatures that you're gonna be seeing at night. If you don't have a warm sleeping pad, doesn't matter how warm your sleeping bag is, you're still gonna get cold because you're compressing that insulation that's underneath you and then making it pretty much ineffective. With a quilt, you're getting rid of that insulation that's compressed and not as effective, and you're saving a lot of weight because of that. The third thing is cost. I'm not gonna get into the math behind it all, but basically if you're taking a quilt and then comparing it to an equivalent sleeping bag, quilts are generally gonna cost less. The fourth thing is versatility. In my experience, you can take a quilt through a wider range of temperatures compared to a sleeping bag. If you want to, you can really lock the quilt down so you stay really warm, as well as if you get too warm, you can open the quilt up, stick an arm or leg out, and cool off a bit. And that's a lot more difficult to do with a sleeping bag. And the fifth thing is customization. A lot of quilts are made by cottage manufacturers. I'll post a link up there and how to buy a quilt. There's a lot of different pieces that I think are important to consider, but because they're made by cottage manufacturers, there's a lot of customization that you can do with color, materials, the fill of the down. Almost all the features with the quilt are customizable, and that makes it so you can tailor it a lot to what you need and the conditions that you're gonna be camping or backpacking in. So maybe that sold you on the benefits of a quilt, and now you're thinking, all right, I'm sold, how do I buy one? Like I said, most quilts are sold by cottage manufacturers like Enlighten Equipment, Underground Quilts, and Hammock Gear. And I'll post links to all 3 of those companies down in the video description. They're all awesome companies that make great quilts, and you can't go wrong with any of them. I have here the Enlighten Equipment Enigma quilt, and I love this quilt quite a bit. I would go take a look at all 3 of those manufacturers, see what the different features that they offer are, as well as the colors might be one of the big differentiators for you, and then see which manufacturer and which quilt is going to be for you. Once you decide on the manufacturer that you want to go with, you can then customize the color of the outer, the color of the inner, the denier and weight of the fabric that you're going to be using, the power of the fill of the down that you're going to be putting into the quilt, as well as the temperature rating that you're going to be using. And you can even customize whether the foot box is enclosed or has a zipper up here so you can open the quilt up. And like I said, these are a lot of different options, and I have gone into all these options and what I recommend in detail in the video that was right up there. In addition, I'll post links to all these videos in the video description, and my quilt playlist will be linked at the end of this video, so you can check that out if you want to see all the information that I have out there about quilts. Something to keep in mind is because the quilts are custom made, they take 4 to 8 weeks, sometimes longer like right now, to get delivered to you. And because of that, it's important to make sure that you're planning ahead and making sure you're gonna get the quilt in time for that big trip that you might be buying the quilt for. The next 2 things I want to talk about have to do with storing and taking care of the quilt. So how do I pack the quilt when I'm going on trips? And same with a sleeping bag, I put it into a dry bag. Some people just put it into the bottom of their bag and just let it kind of spread out, but I like having it contained and in the dry bag just in case it does rain. I don't want to be getting my quilt wet, especially because it's down. Because it's down, it compresses quite well. I use a 10-liter dry bag by Hilltop Packs, and then I put that at the bottom of my bag. And then once I'm done a trip and I've dried my quilt out by just laying it out and fluffing it up occasionally, I store it in a big cotton bag. So you want to use a really big bag because that way the down in the quilt isn't getting compressed unnecessarily, and you're going to elongate the life of your quilt. Storing it in a cotton bag is good because cotton's very, very breathable, and if there's any residual moisture in your quilt, it's gonna be able to breathe out, whereas sil nylon or sil poly bags won't breathe quite as well. And the last main thing is how to use a quilt. And I'm gonna go over that in a follow-up video that you're gonna have to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for. Otherwise, I'm gonna post a link right up there to a playlist that I have that goes over how to stay warm with a quilt, those tips on how to buy a quilt, as well as a whole bunch of other things. So check that out. And quilts are awesome. So I highly recommend looking into them and maybe switching over from sleeping bags. Thanks for watching, guys.